How about we'll start with where were you born and where did you grow up?
I'm going to pull up the questions just so I have them in front of me.
Yeah.
So I was born in Merced County, in the city of Merced, and I grew up in Winton, which is an unincorporated town within Merced County. It's a very small town. We don't have sidewalks. We have an elementary school and 2 middle schools now. Two elementary schools and 1 middle school, and now there's a second middle school, but I had to go to Atwater for high school. So
There was no high school
there's
there?
no high school in Winton. There was one grocery store. It's definitely a food desert. There's no public transportation. They stopped the bus systems. The bus systems were on and off throughout like my childhood, and when I was in middle school, it depended on funding or how they were using their funding. So I grew up walking home in an area that doesn't have any sidewalks. So
That's crazy. So what would you say they were using the funding for such like a small city?
I bet it was an administrators, because that's for the most part where the funding goes historically. I didn't know any better then. I didn't know how to be critical of my upbringing. I didn't understand racism. I didn't understand justice. I didn't understand resources, or that there were places that were better, because I hadn't grown up anywhere else. I was literally born and raised in the same house, and born in the city of Merced, in the hospital there.
So what was the community like for Winton? Was it like, what was the diversity there?
Mainly Latino, probably 98% Latino farm workers. People either worked as farm workers in the fields or they worked at foster farms. There's not a whole lot of in between. So farm workers in the distribution centers, sweet potatoes, almonds, peaches, like you name it, it's surrounding the neighborhoods and the elementary schools and the middle schools, or they worked at foster farms, which is the poultry distributor.
So how about like the authority figures, so like teachers, principals, like the cops?
They're white.
They're all white.
And we don't have a police department in Winton, so we were patrolled by the sheriff, Merced County Sheriff's Department, also white. And then when there was a CHP station that was built, I believe probably in 2003 or so, the CHP, the Highway Patrol, also started patrolling Winton, because we don't have a police department there.
So then did you feel like, because it was 98% Hispanic, did you feel like ever racism? Since there's like, you're surrounded, but as opposed to like the authority figures being white, like how is the, like, there was never no like racism ever?
There definitely was, and I didn't know it. I didn't know it until I left. So when I graduated from high school, I went to Long Beach State. So I completely like left the valley to a community that was very diverse, because there really wasn't a whole lot of diversity in Winton. It was mainly Latinos. My high school was mainly Latino, a few white folks, and then like probably like a tenth of folks from Hmong. We have a big Hmong community in Atwater and Merced. So it really was not diverse. We had probably like 3 or 4 African American kids in my high school. And so when I went to Long Beach, I entered a much more diverse city with a lot more resources. And even at that point, it was kind of like, well, I'm in LA and there's a lot of things in LA, you know? And so it wasn't until I took a couple of classes that opened my eyes a little bit around racism and racist systems, mostly like how structures and systems are put into place to literally keep people down and keep people where they're at. And so when I wanted to be a special ed teacher. So I did not want to like.
So this is a big kind of career change.
Yeah, like I took poli-sci that was required as part of my GE. So this was definitely not what I wanted out of my life. And it wasn't until I came back that I was like much more reflective around seeing the community that I grew up in look exactly the same as when I grew up in it, right? Like 20 years later, we still don't have sidewalks. Our schools are still not doing well. They built instead of building a high school in Winton, they built another high school in the nicer part of town, and that's the nicer part of town, right? So like you also have it was much less diverse, and they had a lot more resources. So they had more classes that were offered than Atwater High. It's called BUHAC. They had more resources. They had more AP classes. They had more honors classes. They had more after school programs than we did. They had a bus system that worked. And so it wasn't until like I came home that I began to see it. It was because it was so normal growing up.
So even like in that small town, you guys still had like a somewhat visible class system of where like farmers and then
Absolutely.
So you can tell the difference in neighborhoods. So like you can enter a neighborhood and kind of assume this might be where like low income lives, as opposed to like Northwest Fresno, where you can see like everything gets bigger, streets get bigger, sidewalks get nicer.
So not as much in the town of Winton. So in Winton, the neighborhoods for the most part look pretty similar.
Okay.
There is the worser parts of town where the most crime happens and all of that, but it's the outsides of it where the orchards, where you see these huge, beautiful mansions.
So it seems like they kind of forgot a little bit about the
and
people.
so, but when you look at Atwater, which is where my high school was, it's a much, like you can very clearly see the difference like you would in North Fresno and South Fresno, or the west side and the northwest side.
Yeah.
And I think because of the readings and the things that I was exposed to in college, I began to reflect a lot more about the interactions that I had, the way my counselor interacted with me, the way my teachers interacted with me, what I was encouraged to do and not to do, what classes I was encouraged to take and not take. And so I went through all of those experiences of experiencing racism directly and indirectly with the systems that are put into place. But I didn't know in that moment. I had no idea. It's not until now that I'm like, wow.
Now that you reflect back. So what was an example you think, like looking back, where it was like a clear, like, okay, so now I see what you were saying. When at the time you didn't know because you didn't know better, but now looking back, you're like, oh, okay, so then that's what you're trying to imply.
So when I was in, I think it must have been sophomore year of high school, I went to meet with my counselor, which we only had like a counselor enough to meet. I think I probably met with her once a year, if that. And I was looking at classes, and my siblings, so I'm the youngest of 5. So out of the 5, 3 of them have, 2 of them, and about to be 3, have graduated from 4-year colleges. So, and the youngest before me is 11 years older than me. So I'm like the miracle baby. So they had a lot of experiences. So they would push me to take AP classes, and honors classes, and all of these things. And so when I was meeting with my counselor to make my schedule for junior year, she wanted me to take the like cooking the food, and then the child, what was it called? Like a child development class. And I wanted to take AP Bio and AP English. And she was encouraging me against it to take, so now I reflect and I'm like, why in the world would someone encourage a young woman of color to not take AP Bio and to not take AP English?
So, sorry.
And the only so had I been the firstborn, I would have taken the child development, and I would have taken
that's crazy.
But because I had my siblings that had been through these experiences before, they knew better, right? Like they knew, like you need to take AP Bio, you need to take AP English, you need to take any classes that are offered that are gonna make you better equipped. Where that would not happen to a white man. Right? Like that would have never, ever, ever happened. It probably wouldn't have happened at BUHAC because it was much less diverse. And so even for the students of color, there was probably more encouragement. And there was more AP and honors classes offered there than there is even now at Atwater High.
So, which brings up like this topic that I'm learning in like Com 114, which basically where it states that teacher, predominantly like white teacher, tend to lose kind of connections with students of color because they're put into situations where they tend to not need to understand culture. Would you say that's like true? Would you say usually the white people are usually don't need to understand other people's culture to put them in certain positions or something like that?
Yeah, they don't have to. Even in the valley that is so diverse. I think you asked this question in class around how in Fresno, a city that is so diverse, are we still making decisions against the very people that hold up the economy. We actually in 2017 ran a immigrant messaging campaign in the city of Fresno, and it was a pilot project that was piloted in Fresno, Orange County, and Nashville. The reason those 3 sites were chosen was because the 3 sites are incredibly diverse, a lot of immigrants and new immigrants at that, and at the same time incredibly conservative and like racist politics in those 3 cities, like Orange County, Fresno, and Nashville. And so we ran a project identifying folks in the middle, and by the middle I mean like 1 to 10, are you supportive of immigrants or completely against them? So we were trying to find the people in the middle, because our sense is like either extreme, like this side is already with immigrants and they're going to be supportive of policies, and this side is just kind of like God knows where, and so let's not even waste our resources and energy there. So who are the people in the middle that maybe turn on Fox News and can only repeat back talking points of why they don't like immigrants, or why immigration is bad? Oh, because they take our jobs, or they're taking our resources, but have never actually had an encounter, actually heard a story, or even been able to connect the people that they know in their lives who have had stories around immigration, and to have a conversation. So we literally canvassed neighborhoods and shared story. We had canvassers going to door sharing their own immigration stories and asking the people at the door to share experiences, if they had had any, with immigration, and experiences around compassion, when somebody had showed compassion to them, in trying to connect like story and encounter people, because that's, I mean, if you're not forced, like you're saying, like people in the valley really don't have to understand culture. Things are changing, but to be a teacher or to be a police officer, you really, maybe they put you through a 1-day course around cultural competencies. It's not going to change anything. What you read is not going to change anything. What's going to change that is like story and encounter, and being able to connect it to your own life.
Because I feel like you're right. Like when we see more of a personal side, we tend to be more compassionate, because you see people on the news, they're doing more of the dehumanizing of immigrants versus that this is an actual person, not an immigrant, you know. So,
and if it's a person far away. And what we were trying to do in that project is say, this is your neighbor. This is the person behind you at the grocery store. This is the person sitting next to you at church, right? Like,
so sad.
So what was it called that you said?
It was through the CIPC, California Immigrant Policy Center, and it was an immigrant messaging project, and it was based on the LGBTQ marriage rights work that was done through the lab in LA. They did something similar after they had lost in the US like 40 times fights around marriage rights and like who could be married. And then California, you all may remember, you may be too young, Proposition 8. That was a proposition to allow marriage between same-sex individuals. We lost that one too. And so the campaign, the LGBTQ campaign around marriage rights, reassessed. They like debriefed and said, like, why do we keep losing? And what they realized is that the people that were with them were already with them, so there wasn't any sense in spending resources there, and the people that were against them were just not going to change. So how do you identify the people in the middle? And so we try to recreate that with the Immigrant Policy Center. After the Trump campaign. You know, to ask those questions, right? Like, it's like they get away with anything because there's nobody asking them any questions.
That's crazy. So then you, as a group, could you like kind of expose that as well in that county, that they're not even that's crazy.
Yeah, but you keep those. Parents used to go to sleep like at 9 or 10. It was probably like 1 or 2 a.m. when I got home, because we had an election party here.
Really big pill that we're trying to swallow.
And then it's like, it's race, and then it's gender. I don't have kids, but my niece didn't even have a conversation. And I was like, what the hell, he's not a Republican anymore? It was really interesting. But that's kind of like the different dynamics that we've had around.
So going back to like race and racism, like, or not necessarily that, but I'm looking at this question: how does being an American fit into your identity? and how do you feel about it? So, like, growing up, were you ever asked, like, what are you? As in terms of, like, are you, like, what was your response? I'm Mexican, I'm American, I'm, like, what was your go-to response in terms of, like, your identity?
I don't think I've ever said I'm American.
No?
Yeah,
You say I'm Mexican?
I'm
But did
Mexican.
you receive that question more in like probably college than versus like growing up? And because you said it's
Not
mostly
really, not a whole lot. Like only in like structured spaces have I received that question. But I think people in California, especially, see you and they're like, "Oh, she's Mexican," you know,
Yeah.
'cause I'm brown, so it's pretty easy to assess. And in my community, like everybody's Mexican. You're not even from El Salvador or Honduras or whatever else. Like you're Mexican. Period. If you're brown in the Central Valley. That changed a little bit in Long Beach. I got those questions a little bit more because people are from different parts of Latin America, but for the most part. But I remember like when Mexico used to play against the U.S., it was always like my dad would kind of have a conflict of like, who do we go for? And we'd be like, well, Mexico, because the U.S. definitely doesn't accept us, you know? And I think, so I'm born here. I was born in Merced. My parents are immigrants from Mexico, and through Reagan's amnesty was that they were able to fix their papers, which is the only reason why like my family has papers, and like my parents own their home, and we were able to go to college, you know, like it's a domino effect from there. I bet like if you looked at families that were able to fix their papers in that time, they're doing a lot better than people who came in at the same time and didn't know that resources existed. Because my parents at the time lived in San Francisco. I think because my parents don't know how to read or write, I think if my parents had lived in the Central Valley at that point, they would not have gotten their papers. One, they wouldn't have known. Two, they wouldn't have been able to like find resources to help them. But they lived in San Francisco, so it was like a community that was much more accepting.
That's how my dad, which I don't.
My parents used to go to sleep like at 9 or 10. It was a connection absolutely to my Mexican.
Like,
I think, I mean, and I saw that question around like what policies or something. I think it'd be really interesting to look at. I don't know if there's a report already that exists somewhere, but I wonder like the families that were here at the same time that didn't benefit from the 86 amnesty, like how are they positioned differently now because of that? Because I bet there's some really, really, really huge gaps in like what their children are doing, what they're, you know, because my parents had more opportunities, though they didn't read and write and had always like worked minimum wage jobs, they had papers. So we had health care, like they were able to work at foster farms, which is fucking terrible, but they offer health insurance and benefits, and they got vacation, and they were indoors, and that wouldn't have been the case if they hadn't had their papers, because they would be in the fields, which would have meant that we never would have had health insurance. We wouldn't have had, you know, or we would have had, you know, Medi-Cal, where you're going to clinics and you're waiting 8 hours to maybe be seen, right? That's the reality of the Central Valley. So there was a question around like what policies.
So what do you think is like holding the country back? Is it racism? Or is it like lack of education? Like why don't you think though, or do you think we're going that direction? Because I remember like a history teacher told me like and he was like an old white guy.
It's literally been sold a lie that like they don't matter, their votes don't matter, and nobody cares. And so they don't engage, and like that's why people don't care. And so you have these people that maybe mean really well running for office, but their community's not voting in. And in order to stay in office, guess what? You're gonna have to take that money from the Sheriff's Association. You're gonna have to take that money from the California Apartment Association, because that money's gonna help you buy canvassers and pay them $25 an hour to go sell people a lie. It's gonna help you buy mailers that like demonize whoever and make you look really, really good, because those are the things that people causes people to vote, and like the people that need to vote, they're not engaging.
And I feel like it's kind of like a hopeless feeling in a sense too, because I feel like a lot of people who run, the only thing they're saying is we're gonna fix it, but not proposing how. But I think a lot of people are so like scared or stuck that they're kind of just like, well, we're gonna vote this person in. He says he's gonna fix it, so let's watch him fix it instead of like we need to stand up together and we can fix it ourselves, kind of thing. You know? Would you say it's kind of like that?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think that there's any representative that can fix it. I don't think that there's any policy that's gonna fix it. It's racism and capitalism. It's greed.
Yeah.
It's those two things, and I think I think it's not impossible. I think things are changing. I think that there's a lot of really good work happening throughout the nation that needs to be supportive. I think that young people are really like waking up and being like, wait a second. What the fuck? And I think that's going to make a huge difference. I won't see it in my lifetime, but I think that we're on the right path. I think that Trump is a really terrible person, and at the same time, I think he has woken some people up that otherwise would have been like, racism died 50 years ago with the civil rights movement, you know? Now you can't say that. Like, you really like cannot say that without laughing at somebody, which is different, I think, from 10 years ago.
Very true.
Okay, let's see. I like this.